I'm Kyle Harris, 33 years old, from Austin, Texas. For as long as I can remember, my family never took me seriously. I was the overlooked son, the one they whispered about but never included. I wasn't rich or flashy like my brother Josh, and for years, Thanksgiving dinners felt more like trials than celebrations. But this story isn't just about rejection or family drama. It's about what happens when the person everyone wrote off quietly builds something no one saw coming. If you want to hear how I went from invisible to the CEO of a $90 million company and how that changed everything, stick with me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from and what you think will happen before the big reveal. I read every message, and your support means the world. This is my story. Thanksgiving has always been the time of year I dreaded most. While others looked forward to turkey, pie, and the warmth of family, I braced myself for the annual tradition of subtle insults, forced smiles, and being reminded of where I stood in the Harris family pecking order, which was at the very bottom. This year, however, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that came from building something no one knew about. Maybe it was just curiosity to see if anything had changed. I hadn't seen my family in nearly 2 years, not since the last time I was talked over at the dinner table and assigned to carry folding chairs out to the garage. But I'd grown in the dark, like a seed under pressure, watered by every word they'd used to doubt me. I had become someone else entirely. And I was ready to walk back into the lion's den, not to roar, not yet, but to observe, to watch them choke on their own pride later. So I cleaned up my appearance, got a haircut, wore a decent pair of pants, and a blazer that didn't scream designer, but didn't say discount bin either. I washed and vacuumed my aging Ford, made sure it didn't reek of coffee or stress, and I made the 40-minute drive to Westlake where my older brother Josh had just moved into his third house, a massive gated property that looked like it belonged on the cover of some luxury real estate magazine. When I arrived, I stopped in front of the steel gate with its curved iron bars and tiny security cameras aimed at every possible angle. I pressed the buzzer once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. I waited. A minute passed, then 2. I leaned out the window and waved at the nearest camera, thinking maybe someone would see me. Still nothing. I glanced down at my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I sent a message to Josh, "Hey, I'm here at the gate." Waited again. 5 minutes. I texted Mom. No reply. The music from inside was faint, but I could hear it. Laughter, glasses clinking, the faint roar of conversation. The party was already in full swing. It was cold out, not freezing, but that kind of brisk that cuts deeper when your pride's already wearing thin. 10 minutes? 15. By minute 20, I debated turning around. But I stayed, because something inside me said this was necessary. Finally, with no warning, the gate clicked and creaked open. No greeting. It opened like it did for deliveries or landscapers. I drove in, slowly, past luxury vehicles I couldn't name but knew cost more than my yearly salary used to be. My Ford, clean as it was, felt like a rust bucket in their polished driveway. I parked near the edge of the lot, as far from the others as possible, and got out. My shoes crunched over the perfect gravel. I took a deep breath, put on a neutral expression, and walked to the door, which, conveniently, was wide open. Inside, it was a different world. Warm lighting, a double staircase, Christmas lights already decorating the banister even though it was only Thanksgiving. I stepped in and was hit by the smell of catered food and a faint floral scent that came from whatever designer candle my sister-in-law Lindsay loved to brag about. Josh stood near the fireplace, laughing loudly with some of his work friends, holding a crystal glass of dark amber liquor. He saw me and did a double take, like he wasn't sure who I was for a second. Then that smirk spread across his face. "Look who finally decided to show up," he shouted across the room, just loud enough to draw attention. "We thought you got lost, or bailed like last year." The jab stung a little, but I smiled anyway. "Nah, just hung out at the gate for a while." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, someone was supposed to watch that. My bad." No apology. No real acknowledgement. just dismissal wrapped in forced casualness. Mom approached next, arms spread in mock welcome. She kissed the air near my cheek and gave me a once-over. "Didn't bring anyone?" she asked. "Or anything?" Her tone wasn't angry, just disappointed. Then the punchline: "Well, next time, bring at least a turkey if you're still unemployed." I laughed softly. "Good to see you too, Mom." She didn't respond, just floated off to adjust the placement of cranberry sauce on the buffet table. The rest of the room barely noticed I was there. He said, waving toward the basement. "Custom designed. Italian oak. Cost me almost as much as Kyle's rent, probably." There it was, the first jab of the evening, coated in a grin, camouflaged as a joke. A few people chuckled. I didn't flinch. I knew better than to react. But I could feel the room shift, just slightly, as if the foundation beneath me had tilted a few degrees. Josh walked over to the island where appetizers were being served on polished slate boards and poured himself another drink. "You know," he continued, "this place wasn't cheap. $2 million, but worth every cent. You get what you pay for, unless you're renting a shoebox in East Austin, right, Kyle?" He didn't look at me as he said it. He didn't need to. The comment landed, got the desired laugh, and kept the narrative alive that I was still the family underachiever, the eternal screw-up. I didn't answer. I just sipped my drink and nodded politely, as if he were talking about the weather. In moments like these, silence is power. And if there was one thing I'd learned in the past 2 years of building a business from the ground up, it's that real strength doesn't need to shout. Lindsay, his wife, appeared next to me like she had materialized from thin air, holding a tray of artisan deviled eggs. She was in hostess mode, smiling too wide, moving too fast. "Kyle," she said sweetly, "we didn't realize you were coming, so we didn't have a seat at the main table. But don't worry, I grabbed you a chair from the garage." She handed me a flimsy white folding chair, the kind you'd expect at a church potluck, and added in a lowered voice, "This used to be the maid's chair. But hey, it still works. You don't mind, do you?" Her smile was sharper than the carving knives laid out on the buffet table. I forced another nod, took the chair, and carried it toward the patio where the long dining table had been arranged with elegant place settings and name cards, none of which had mine. They'd made sure I was present, but not included. As I unfolded the chair and set it next to the far end of the table, I heard my cousin Rachel mutter, "Why didn't he just eat before coming? Or bring something?" Her voice wasn't angry, just dismissive, like I was a guest who had wandered in by accident. I placed the chair down and sat quietly, folding my hands in my lap like a schoolboy waiting to be called on. The rest of the guests began trickling out to the patio, drinks in hand, laughter in full swing. Josh started giving a tour of the backyard landscaping, the heated pool, the fire pit, the smart lighting system, as if he were the host of a reality show called Houses You'll Never Afford. Someone asked about the art on the walls. "Oh, that?" Josh said. "Commissioned. Local artist. Not the kind of stuff you'd find on Kyle's living room wall. Unless he finally upgraded from that Bob Marley poster." Again, more laughter. Again, I sat still. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was collecting, cataloging, remembering. Dinner was served buffet style, but before I could even make it to the front of the line, I noticed the caterers had been instructed to serve from right to left, starting from Josh's end of the table and working down. By the time the trays reached my end, the portions were noticeably thinner. The cranberry sauce was nearly gone, and the turkey looked like the remains of a battlefield. I took what I could and returned to my folding chair, which creaked with every shift of my weight. Everyone else sat in cushioned rattan seats with high backs and decorative pillows. No one noticed the contrast, or maybe they did and pretended not to. Josh raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said with a smirk. "To success, to new beginnings, and to those of us who never gave up, even when the odds were against us." He locked eyes with me for just a moment, and the room chuckled. It was a theatrical moment designed for performance, designed to isolate. I raised my glass, nodded again, and drank the flat ginger ale in front of me. Couples were placed next to each other, older relatives were given easy access to heating lamps, and all the high-powered uncles and successful cousins were given prime seats in the middle, near Josh and Dad, the unofficial power hub of the family. As names were called and chairs were claimed, I noticed something strange. My name never came up. I waited, thinking maybe they had simply forgotten to say it out loud. Maybe I was to find my own seat like some kind of Thanksgiving nomad. Then Lindsay pointed to the far end of the patio, near a smaller, lower table pushed slightly to the side, surrounded by plastic chairs and booster seats. "Kyle," she said, forcing a chipper smile, "we've set you up with the young ones, so you'll be close to the s'more station. That'll be fun, right?" I looked over and saw 3 kids under 12, including my 10-year-old nephew Brandon, already seated there, playing with their phones and dipping their fingers into whipped cream. The kids' table. Not even the teenage table. The literal child corner. I opened my mouth to object, not out of pride but basic dignity, but Josh clapped me on the back and said, "Come on, man. It's tradition. You always brought the best jokes when we were younger. They'll love you." His words were coated in the kind of condescension that dares you to protest so they can label you oversensitive. I stared at him for a moment, then quietly walked to the child-sized chair and lowered myself into it, knees bent awkwardly, trying to make it look like I was in on the joke even as my face burned. The adult table filled quickly. Conversation turned to mortgages, investment portfolios, international schools for kids, and vacations that cost more than I'd spent on rent in a year. Meanwhile, at my little plastic table, Brandon and his friends argued about whether Mario Kart or Fortnite was better. A 7-year-old knocked over a glass of water, soaking part of my pant leg. No one noticed. No one offered to help. I dabbed it with a napkin and forced a laugh, like I was thrilled to be part of their sandbox society. Eventually, someone from the adult table turned toward me. Uncle Greg, always the loud one, raised his wine glass and shouted, "Hey, Kyle, you still doing that tech stuff, or did you give that up?" A few people turned to listen. I smiled and replied, "I actually run my own business now." That should have been a moment of mild respect, or at least polite curiosity. Instead, the room erupted into laughter. "Your own business?" Josh said, eyebrows raised. "What, like an Etsy store?" "Lemonade stand for grown-ups," Uncle Greg added. Even Dad joined in. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink slowly before adding, "Don't tell me it's one of those TikTok consulting things. I saw a video on that. Teens making millions by teaching other teens how to be useless." The laughter was louder this time, more sustained. A few people fake clapped. Lindsay covered her mouth, pretending to hide her amusement. I looked down at my plate, untouched. The turkey had gone cold. The cranberry sauce had bled into the mashed potatoes, creating a mushy pink paste that looked like melted dignity. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, some mocking, some just curious about how I would respond. I didn't lash out. I didn't explain the deals I'd closed, the clients I had in Europe and Silicon Valley, or the press interviews waiting for clearance. I didn't talk about the funding round we'd secured or the team of 30 I was now responsible for. I didn't bring up the NDA I had signed with a Fortune 100 company or the valuation we were projected to hit by Q2, because none of that would matter to them. They had already decided who I was, a failure with a LinkedIn page. A guy who used words like freelance and consult as code for unemployed. I knew I couldn't break their narrative by force. I would have to let it collapse on its own, under the weight of its own arrogance. So I smiled. I raised my glass of lukewarm ginger ale, nodded, and said, "Yeah, something like that." Rachel, my cousin who had once taken a photography course and now called herself a visual strategist, leaned in from the adult table and said, "Well, you look like you're doing okay considering. I mean, you made it here, right?" Another chuckle rippled through the group. I turned to look at her directly, not with anger, just clarity. "I did," I said. "And I'm glad to be here. It's nice to see everyone doing so well." They heard sarcasm in my words. I didn't correct them. Let them think I was bitter. Let them lean into their comfortable delusion that I was clinging to crumbs while they dined on roast and caviar. The real feast was still coming. I thought I had weathered the full storm, but I underestimated their appetite for cruelty, especially when it came wrapped in smiles and laughter. As the plates were cleared and wine glasses refilled, Josh stood up, clapped his hands like a camp counselor, and said, "Okay, everyone, gather around. It's time for the Harris Thanksgiving game night. People groaned and chuckled, some with genuine excitement, others feigning enthusiasm. This year, Josh continued, clearly relishing his role as ringleader. We're going to do something different. We're going to play a game called Who's the Most Successful? A few people laughed nervously. Josh went on. We'll go around and everyone can nominate someone at the table they think is the most successful. We'll narrow it down each round until we have a winner. No hurt feelings, okay? It's just for fun. The irony was cruel and thick, like molasses on a cold day. This wasn't a game. It was a coronation ceremony designed to elevate Josh and remind everyone else, especially me, of their place in the family hierarchy. The guests humored him. Oh, this'll be fun, someone said. I already know who's winning. Laughter spread like wildfire. I sat still, expression neutral, heart rate steady. I already knew what was coming. Josh handed out pieces of paper and pens, like some schoolteacher running a popularity contest in a high school homeroom. Write down the name of the person you think deserves the title, he said. Success can mean anything: career, family, money, lifestyle. Totally subjective. Except we all knew it wasn't. In this family, success had a dollar sign in front of it, a luxury car in the driveway, and a job title that sounded impressive at cocktail parties. I wrote a name, folded my paper, and passed it in. The votes were counted by Lindsay and her best friend Danielle, who giggled like they were hosting a game show. Okay, Lindsay announced. First elimination, Kyle. The announcement was met with exaggerated gasps and playful boos. Oh, poor Kyle, someone said. Guess he's out of the running. I smiled, not because I was amused, but because I was fascinated. The room had reached a level of delusion I had only suspected before. They truly believed this was funny, that it was okay, that I was a good-natured punching bag, too simple or too weak to be wounded. I mean, Josh chimed in, no offense, bro, but you said you were doing your own thing, right? Freelancing or consulting, whatever. That's cool, but this is about success. The way he said success made it sound like a sacred word, reserved for him and the few he deemed worthy. Uncle Greg laughed so hard he choked on his drink. Dad leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a smirk. Having a son like Josh is a blessing, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then he turned to me. Kyle, well, he's just been a disappointment for 30 years. It didn't feel like a knife to the chest. It felt like confirmation. Like someone turning on a light in a room I already knew was empty. I had suspected my father saw me that way, but to hear it aloud, stated so casually, so publicly, gave it a weight that settled deep in my gut. No one came to my defense. No one even looked at me. They were too busy laughing, too busy watching Josh bask in the glow of his manufactured glory. The game continued. Rachel, the visual strategist, was eliminated next. No stable income. Then Uncle Greg, too many failed businesses. The remaining contenders were all people with traditional jobs and big paychecks. Josh, naturally, made it to the final round against a cousin who owned a chain of car washes. This is fun, right? Lindsay asked me, handing me another ginger ale. I took it, nodded, and sipped slowly. She didn't notice my hand shaking, just slightly. When Josh was eventually declared the winner, complete with a fake crown and plastic scepter someone had dug out from a Halloween bin, the room erupted in applause. Dad stood up and raised his glass. To my son Josh, he said, voice booming, the pride of this family. A man who always knew what he wanted and went out and earned it. That's success, folks. The toast was met with cheers and glass clinks. I stayed seated, staring at the bottom of my drink. No one noticed that I didn't raise my glass. No one asked how I felt being eliminated in the first round, and no one blinked when Dad dismissed me like a failed science project he regretted starting. For the rest of the evening, I floated on the edges of conversations. I nodded when someone joked about crypto scams. I laughed politely when Brandon asked me if I wanted to play Uno. I even helped clear some plates, just to have something to do with my hands. But inside, something sharp had taken root. Not bitterness, that had long passed. Not sadness either. There was a kind of crystal clarity, a knowing that they had drawn the final line, built the final wall, and sealed their opinion of me in concrete. There was no more hoping they'd see me differently, no more wishing they'd care. That part of the story was over. The laughter continued without missing a beat, and I found myself standing beside the empty folding chair I had occupied all night. The cushionless seat seemed to mock me now more than ever, as if it had been crafted specifically to reinforce my place in the family, unwanted, forgotten, disposable. The caterers began clearing the dinner plates and refreshing drinks, and I watched as Mom directed them like a high society matriarch, her perfectly coordinated holiday outfit matching the silver napkin holders she'd gushed about last year. I could tell dessert was coming soon, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself the thought that maybe, just maybe, something sweet would come from this night. The memory of her lemon pie, her specialty, the one thing that had always brought us together even in strained times, flashed in my mind like a soft glow in the dark. As a child, I used to help her whisk the filling, her hand guiding mine over the mixing bowl. It was one of the only warm memories I had, and for some reason, I let myself believe it still meant something. I waited near the kitchen patio door, hands in pockets, eyes scanning for that familiar pie dish. Finally, I saw it. Mom entered carrying a large glass tray with slices of her lemon pie perfectly arranged and topped with delicate swirls of whipped cream. The family clapped as she placed it on the dining table, right in front of Josh and Dad. "Best part of the night," someone yelled. "Wouldn't be Thanksgiving without it," another added. I waited for her to offer me a slice or even glance in my direction. Nothing. Guests were served one by one. Plates were passed down the line. The tray was getting lighter with each passing minute. I approached slowly, trying not to appear too eager, just casually stepping closer. That's when Mom turned toward me, her expression unchanged, and said loudly enough for several people to hear, "Oh, we only made enough for the main table. You know, for those who earned their seat." A few eyebrows raised. Josh chuckled under his breath and shook his head like I was a kid being denied dessert for skipping homework. The tray emptied. Not a single slice was saved for me. It wasn't about the pie. It never had been. It was about what the pie represented: belonging, acknowledgement, a symbol that I still mattered in some small way. But tonight, that final thread had been cut. I turned away, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. I didn't storm off. I didn't say a word. I simply walked into the garden, the cold air sharp against my face, my breath visible in the moonlight. The Harris Estate's backyard was enormous, with hedges trimmed to geometric perfection and fairy lights strung along the treetops. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. As I wandered deeper into the garden, past the koi pond and the expensive pergola, I paused near the far stone bench where no one else could hear me. I exhaled slowly, trying to process everything: the gate, the folding chair, the humiliation, the game, the pie. All of it. I wanted to believe this was all some misunderstanding, some collective lapse in empathy. But I knew better. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This was tradition. A tradition of diminishing me, of erasing me in plain sight. Then I heard it, voices drifting from the patio. I froze, listening. It was Mom, her voice sharper than I remembered. She was talking to someone, probably Lindsay or one of the cousins. "Honestly, I didn't even invite him," she said, followed by a dry laugh. "Guess he thought he was welcome." The words sliced through me like cold steel. I had driven 40 minutes across the city, dressed in clothes I thought might help me blend in, waited 20 minutes at a gate they refused to open, and now I found out I wasn't even on the guest list. I felt something tighten in my chest, not quite anger, not quite sorrow, but a heavy, suffocating blend of both. I turned away from the light, choosing instead to walk along the hedge-lined path that circled the property. Each step felt heavier than the last. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from a client confirming the Tuesday meeting, complete with a calendar invite and a link to our shared documents. A reminder of my real life, the one none of them knew about, the one they refused to even ask about. I put the phone away and stood at the edge of the garden, staring up at the sky, stars peeking through the clouds. indifferent to the drama below. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Done hoping. Done wishing they'd see me. Done waiting for dessert that would never be served. Yet somehow, fate decided to throw one last ember into the flames of humiliation before the night ended. A few stragglers remained inside the living room, lingering over dessert plates and espresso cups while the outdoor patio cleared out. I was passing through quietly, intending to slip out without a sound, when my cousin Trevor stopped me with a question I hadn't expected. "So, Kyle," he said, in a tone that teetered on genuine curiosity, "you mentioned earlier you had your own business. What do you actually do?" For a split second, I paused. Not because I didn't know how to answer, but because I wasn't sure if this was another setup. I glanced around. Josh was lounging on the couch with a bourbon in hand, Lindsay seated beside him, Dad standing nearby with that same half smirk glued to his face. I could feel their eyes on me. Still, I nodded, forcing a smile. "Well, I run a tech consultancy. We specialize in security systems and infrastructure scalability, mostly enterprise-level work. I just opened our new office last month." I reached for my phone, thumbed through my gallery, and pulled up a photo of the office, glass walls, modern furniture, server racks humming quietly in the background, a skyline view framed by tall windows. I held it out. "Here it is." Josh didn't even glance before scoffing. "Let me guess, it's your bedroom with a desk and a decent IKEA lamp?" He leaned back and sipped his drink, as if delivering the punchline of a well-rehearsed bit. Laughter trickled through the room, not explosive, just smug. I didn't lower my phone. I didn't argue. I simply held it steady, letting the image speak. But Dad stepped in next, walking closer, peering at the screen with exaggerated squinting before shaking his head. "At least he's got Wi-Fi," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's more than we expected, right?" Then he turned to the room, raised his glass, and delivered the final insult of the evening. Kyle's always been good at pretending. Even as a kid, he used to play office in the garage. Wouldn't surprise me if he's still doing it now. The room chuckled. Josh looked at me, clearly amused, and added, "What's next, Kyle? Gonna show us your CEO badge from Build-A-Bear?" That got a bigger laugh. Even Trevor, who had asked sincerely, offered an awkward chuckle and looked away. My arm slowly dropped. I put the phone back in my pocket and nodded. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Their contempt had become so predictable, so rehearsed, that it had lost the power to wound. What struck me wasn't the insult itself, but the ease with which they all accepted it. No one questioned it. No one pushed back. The assumption that I was a failure had become such a cornerstone of their identity that challenging it would mean tearing down their own inflated image of superiority. I looked at my dad for a long moment. His face was flushed with drink and smugness, proud of his clever remark. This was the same man who once helped me build a science fair project in 5th grade. The same man who coached my little league team before Josh joined varsity football and stole his full attention. I wanted to say something, not to argue or lash out, but just to ask him when exactly he gave up on believing in me. But I knew it wouldn't matter. He had already made his decision. In his eyes, Josh was the heir, the achiever, the son worthy of praise and pride. I was the fluke, the afterthought, the disappointing footnote to the Harris family saga. So I stood there, surrounded by people who wore tailored clothes and fake smiles, people who toasted their own egos and confused wealth with wisdom. And I realized something profound. They hadn't just dismissed me. They had built a version of me so small, so pitiful, that they no longer saw me as a real person. I was a caricature, a running joke in their curated version of reality. And they were addicted to it. The idea that Kyle was the loser, the one who never quite measured up, it gave them comfort, a reason to inflate their own accomplishments. I took a breath and straightened up. "Thanks for the pie," I said softly, not because I meant it, but because I wanted to remind them that I still had grace. That despite everything, the exclusion, the insults, the petty mockery, I still had the strength to speak with dignity. As I turned toward the door, I caught one last comment from Lindsay, whispered but not quiet enough. "Well, at least he'll have a story to tell his online followers." More laughter. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cold night, walked past the empty chairs, the flickering fire pit, the ghost of the game that crowned Josh King of nothing. I made my way to my car, started the engine, and stared at the road ahead. The Ford rumbled to life, its warmth slowly building inside the cabin. I sat there for a moment longer, letting the silence replace the noise. Then I pulled out of the driveway, the mansion fading behind me, each window glowing like a staged photograph in a magazine that nobody really reads. The taste of their laughter, the sting of Dad's final insult, and the echoes of Josh's sneer still lingered in my mind like smoke from a fire I hadn't lit. I stared straight ahead, the house behind me buzzing faintly with sounds of celebration and oblivion when headlights cut through the dark and swept across my windshield. A sleek, old Cadillac pulled into the driveway and parked behind me. I blinked. Only one person in the family drove a car like that. My heart skipped. Grandpa. The one person who never joined in the mockery, who never treated me like the runt of the litter. He hadn't been at the party, wasn't on the guest list. I knew because I overheard Mom saying earlier she'd told him not to bother this year, that it was going to be a more modern, streamlined Thanksgiving. But now he was here, getting out of his car slowly, with the kind of steady grace that only age and wisdom can give a man. I stepped out of my Ford instinctively, unsure if I should approach or just wave. Before I could make up my mind, Grandpa was already walking toward me. He didn't glance at the house, didn't look at the dozens of cars lining the driveway, didn't pause to adjust his coat. His eyes were fixed on me. And when he reached me, he didn't speak at first. He just pulled me into a firm, full hug, the kind that communicated 10 years' worth of unsaid words and unshared moments. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but full of pride, the words deliberate. "I watched your interview on Bloomberg," he said, pulling back just enough to look me in the eye. So this is the $90 million man in the flesh. It was like the world paused. The sound of laughter from inside dimmed. The very air seemed to freeze. I blinked, caught off guard by the suddenness of his words, by the clarity of his acknowledgement, by the way he spoke the figure aloud like it was common knowledge. "You saw that?" "Every second," he replied. "Twice. And I read the article they did on your firm last quarter. Brilliant stuff. Your mother didn't mention it in the family chat, so I figured she forgot. Or deleted it. And then it happened. The front door opened. Lindsay stood there, laughing at something behind her, but the sound died in her throat when she saw Grandpa hugging me. Behind her, Josh stepped into the frame, drink in hand, already smiling, until he heard Grandpa's words. "This is the $90 million man." The words didn't make sense to him at first. He tilted his head like a dog hearing a foreign command. Then Lindsay's smile faltered, her eyes darted between us, and she slowly turned to look back at the rest of the room. A few guests followed her gaze, stepping onto the patio to see what the commotion was. Dad emerged next, confused, perhaps annoyed that his father had arrived without calling first. "Dad?" he asked, stepping outside. Grandpa raised a hand without turning. "Just a minute," he said, eyes still on me. "I wanted to see my grandson, the real success story in this family." Those words, the real success story, dropped like a brick into a pond. The ripples spread instantly. Josh scoffed, loud and forced. "Wait, what are you talking about?" he asked, stepping forward. "You mean his little internet hustle? Dad, come on, you can't be serious." Grandpa finally turned to face him. "I'm dead serious," he said calmly. "Kyle built a security tech firm that just closed a Series B round. They're projected to be worth $100 million in the next year. And he did it without help, without funding from me or anyone in this family. That's more impressive than anything I've seen in this house tonight." Josh opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Lindsay took a step back. Dad looked like he had swallowed his own pride and was now choking on it. A hush fell over the patio. No one laughed. No one clapped. They just stared at Grandpa, at me, at the truth that had suddenly shattered every illusion they had built about who I was. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Grandpa had done it for me. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded magazine. He handed it to Dad. "Page 35, he said. "Full profile. His picture's in there, too. In a real office, not a bedroom with a lamp." Dad took the magazine without speaking. He opened it slowly, scanning the article. His jaw tightened. I saw his hand tremble ever so slightly. For the first time all night, he looked at me, really looked at me, not with derision, but with dawning recognition, with the weight of realization pressing down on years of dismissiveness. Behind him, someone murmured, "Is that true?" Another voice, 90 million? And then the whispers started. Grandpa turned back to me, smiling again. "I came late because I didn't think I was invited," he said. "But something told me tonight was important. And I'm glad I trusted my gut." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've made me proud in ways they can't even understand." The silence that fell over the patio after Grandpa's announcement was heavy, almost suffocating. It felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the room, leaving nothing but stunned faces and racing thoughts. Dad was the first to break the quiet, rising unsteadily from his chair and clapping slowly, almost as if trying to convince himself this moment was real. "Son," he said, his voice wavering slightly, "I always believed in you. Maybe not in the way I showed it, but this was tough love." The words were clumsy and uneven, like a man grasping at redemption after years of neglect. He stepped toward me, eyes searching mine for forgiveness or understanding. But all I felt was the weight of those 30 years of being dismissed, overshadowed, and overlooked. It was a fragile moment, charged with the possibility of healing or further fracture. Josh, who until moments ago had been the embodiment of smug confidence, looked pale and uncertain. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear or maybe respect. I couldn't tell which. After a tense pause, he asked quietly, "So, you hiring a head of marketing?" The question was loaded, a mix of probing and challenge. The room held its breath, waiting for my response. I met his gaze steadily and said, "Actually, yes. We're expanding, and we're looking for the right people to join the team. It's a fast-paced environment, and I'm building something serious." Josh blinked, then nodded slowly, as if acknowledging an inconvenient truth. Lindsay stepped closer, her earlier dismissiveness replaced by cautious curiosity. "Kyle," she said carefully, "maybe you could share some insights with us sometime?" "I think a lot of us have underestimated you." The room murmured in agreement, some faces shifting with new interest, others still skeptical. Dad's voice softened. "You know, Kyle, maybe I was wrong. I should have supported you more. This is impressive." I nodded, accepting the olive branch, but knowing the path to genuine change would take more than words. The rest of the family began to engage, asking questions about the business, the technology, and the future plans. Cousins who had barely glanced my way now leaned in, eager for details. Even Uncle Greg, who had mocked me earlier, looked at me with renewed respect. The dynamic had shifted almost imperceptibly but irrevocably. I was no longer the punchline. I was the protagonist. But beneath the surface of this new interest, I sensed tension. This wasn't just about my success. It was about their fragile egos and the threat my achievements posed to their carefully curated self-images. Josh's forced smile and Dad's hesitant compliments were shields. They were processing a reality that challenged their beliefs and threatened their dominance in this family. I decided to use this moment to plant seeds of change. "I'm happy to help anyone who's serious about growth," I said. "But respect and commitment are non-negotiable. This business didn't get built on empty praise or family politics." The room was silent again, the weight of my words settling over them like a storm cloud. Grandpa smiled approvingly and added, "That's the truth, son. It's about integrity and hard work, things that don't come with a silver spoon." The elders nodded, some more reluctantly than others. The evening wound down with more genuine conversations than I'd heard all night. People shared stories, asked for advice, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in this room. Not because I'd proven them wrong, but because they were beginning to see me as I truly was. The years of dismissal and mockery didn't disappear instantly. but the foundation for reconciliation had been laid. As I looked around at my family, I realized that success wasn't just about money or status. It was about changing hearts and minds, even when it meant breaking through walls built over decades. And tonight, something inside me shifted. The shift in the room's energy was undeniable after Grandpa's revelation and Dad's reluctant acknowledgement of my achievements. But while some of my family began to show genuine curiosity and a newfound respect, others struggled with the consequences of their long-held disdain. I watched Josh closely, the brother who had mocked me the hardest, whose smirk was now replaced by a tense, forced smile. He was no longer the confident leader of the night. Instead, he looked small, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. I realized that this moment was more than just my victory. It was their reckoning. It was a mirror reflecting their insecurities and the cost of underestimating me for so long. When the conversations quieted, I cleared my throat and addressed the room with calm resolve. "I want to make something clear," I said. "My company is growing fast, and I'm proud of what we've built. But we have a core value: respect. We don't work with people who don't show respect to our team or our mission. That includes family." The room fell silent. Some faces flushed. I looked directly at Josh and added, "That means you too. You don't qualify." The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Josh's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Mom's eyes welled with tears, her stoic mask cracking. She came forward hesitantly and took my hand. "Kyle," she whispered, voice breaking, "you're the only successful child I've ever had. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Her admission was raw and painful, a confession that held years of regret and lost chances. I squeezed her hand gently, but didn't rush to forgive. Forgiveness wasn't the point right now. Recognition was. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, sleek key fob, the key to my McLaren parked just outside. I placed it on the table in front of Mom. "Here," I said softly. "This is your ride home. I'll walk." The gesture was symbolic, a way of showing that while I was ready to move forward, I wasn't bound by the past or their acceptance. The key glinted under the patio lights, a stark contrast to the coldness that had permeated the evening. The room watched in stunned silence. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, others whispered among themselves. Dad looked conflicted, caught between pride and pain. Josh finally spoke, voice low and hesitant. "Kyle, maybe we need to talk. I want to understand. Maybe I've been wrong." I nodded, willing to have that conversation, but only on my terms, only when respect was the foundation. Over the next hour, the atmosphere softened. The mockery gave way to tentative questions about my business, my journey, and my plans. For the first time in years, I felt the walls of alienation crack. But I also felt the responsibility that came with this newfound respect. This wasn't just my success anymore. It was a chance to heal, to redefine family, to rewrite the narrative that had trapped us all. As the night wound down, I stepped outside, the cool air filling my lungs. The McLaren's engine purred softly as I approached, the sleek curves reflecting the streetlights. I paused for a moment, looking back at the house where so much had been said and left unsaid. This night had been a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone who had doubted, dismissed, or underestimated me. The drive away from the house felt surreal. The familiar hum of the McLaren's engine beneath me contrasted sharply with the chaotic storm of emotions swirling in my mind. The night had unfolded like a long, painful play, full of humiliation, revelation, and finally, a quiet reckoning. As the city lights faded behind me and the open road stretched ahead, I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up instantly with notifications, texts, and missed calls from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Apologies, questions, requests for meetings, even a few awkward attempts at small talk. They had finally realized I was no longer the boy they'd dismissed. But instead of feeling victorious or hungry for validation, I felt a calm certainty. I opened the keyboard and typed a single reply: "I'm fine, same as every year, except this time I know I don't need any of you." I hit send and placed the phone back in the cup holder. That message wasn't just for them, it was for me. It was a declaration of independence, a reclaiming of self-worth that had long been buried under their judgment. Driving through the quiet streets, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the kid who waited outside the gate, invisible and unwanted, to the man who'd built a multi-million-dollar company without their support or belief. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about proving to myself that I was worthy of respect and love, regardless of what anyone else thought. The irony was that the very family who had tried to diminish me had unwittingly fueled my fire. Their doubt and neglect became the fuel that powered my ambition and resilience. As the night deepened, I realized that the true victory wasn't in changing their minds or seeking their approval. It was in the peace I felt knowing I had created my own path and that I no longer needed their acceptance to define my value. The past, with all its pain and rejection, was finally behind me. The future was mine to shape, filled with possibilities that stretched as far as the horizon. I glanced in the rearview mirror once more, not to look back, but to acknowledge how far I'd come. I smiled, a genuine smile that came from deep within. They had called me a loser for so long, had ignored my potential, and dismissed my dreams. But tonight, they had lost more than just a son. They had lost the chance to be part of my success story. I was no longer the boy waiting for their approval. I was the CEO of a $90 million empire, standing tall on my own terms. And with that, I pressed down on the accelerator, the car roaring to life as I sped toward a new dawn, one defined by self-worth, resilience, and the unwavering belief that our past does not determine our future. The end. If you enjoyed hearing my story, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos like this. I'd love to know what you thought about the plot. Did it surprise you? Was there a part you connected with the most? Also, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. I read every message and really appreciate your support. Thanks for being here and listening to my journey.